This week we'll look at the seventh mountain mandate. Last week I spoke about that shortly, and this week I'd like to look at that in more detail and look at what I believe, explain that. Do I believe that we are supposed to be on the top of these mountains? What do these mountains even mean? So be blessed while listening to this. Hello and welcome to this new video or podcast, depending on the platform which you're listening or looking at this, watching this. This week I would like to do a follow-up of last week. Last week I talked about and very shortly mentioned the seven mountain mandate, but I followed up from the talk about Romans 12, 1 Corinthians 12 and Ephesians 4. Now next week and the weeks after I'll look more into Ephesians 4 and the fivefold ministry, hence the name of this channel. But for this week I'd like to clarify something, and that is the seven mountain mandate. I still use that as a teaching. However, I don't believe that we as Christians should be on the top of those mountains or aspire to do so. I do believe that we are called to take up our influence in this nation or in this world, in the world societies around us. But I don't believe that we are called to be the top of the mountains. So I don't believe that we are called to rule from those mountains, because I think there's a danger in there. But that's my personal opinion, right? So what I believe is that the original revelation came from the two men who came together. That was Bill Bright, who was then the leader of Campus Crusade for Christ, and Lauren Cunningham, who was then a leader of Youth with a Mission, also known as YWAM. And these two men were brought together for I think it was a lunch. I'm retelling the story here, so it could be that I've got some of the details wrong. But they were brought together for lunch, and they realized that even though they were the leaders of the two biggest missionary organizations in the world, and they sent thousands of people out into all kinds of different nations, that none of the nations were actually discipled. They looked at the scripture in Matthew 28 verses 18 to 20, which by the way is why I called my ministry the 1820 Foundation. That's because of those verses, where it says, make disciples of all nations. And they just realized that, we're not actually doing that. We're not making disciples of nations. We've been in some countries for decades by that point, and we haven't really seen the nation change. Yes, we've seen a lot of people come to Christ, but the nation is going down a path to destruction. How is that possible? And since there was a third person in this, not in the conversation, but in this thing that was happening, and the third person had a chat with Lauren Cunningham on this, but also with Bill Bright on this, and he thought, well, isn't that interesting? Both men are struggling with this. Let's put them together, because there might be something coming from that. From there, they were sharing their hearts, and they were sharing what God had taught them. And from that, they actually shared the idea about seven spheres of influence, that all societies, it's not just one sphere, it's several spheres, seven spheres that influence a culture. And these are in no particular order, so it's not like one is more important than the other, but you have the political sphere, who decides the political climate in a country. So everything that goes on into politics, whatever kind of political system is present in your country or in your neighborhood, there is a political sphere. Then there's a business sphere that is all about the making money. So coming up with a solution for a problem and selling that solution and making a profit with that. So that's the business sphere. Then there's media, that is all about sharing news, sharing the truth, or sharing a version of the truth. And that's one of the problems we have in the media sphere at the moment, is that there's a lot of different media channels that are just sharing things. And I'm not talking about a political side here. I'm not saying that everyone on one side is wrong or everyone on the other side is wrong. I'm just saying that a lot of things, a lot of people go into conspiracy theories at the moment, and they call that the real news. And a lot of other people refuse to go into conspiracy theories, and they say that's all fake news. While I think that the truth is somewhere in the middle. There are some conspiracies going on, maybe quite a lot. And that's basically the spiritual warfare that is going on all around us. That is in itself is a conspiracy theory, because if the devil was open and honest about that, of course he's hiding it as a conspiracy. He's hiding it behind the scenes. Anyway, that is the media sphere. And then there's a sphere of science and education. So that is about knowledge. The science part is about gaining the knowledge. So finding out how something works. Why does a heart beat like that? How does the whole system in your body, the varicose system, or does the bone structure work? How does grass grow? Things like that. And then education is the passing on of that knowledge. And we can see that the education system has changed a lot over the last few years, over the last few centuries. And they are teaching things that we find out in science. Now, next there's arts and entertainment, which is all kinds of, art forms. Movies are more like entertainment, of course, but it is an art form. It's an art form to act out something. And sports also fall under this sphere, because the way David Beckham shoots a ball, by the way, or shot a ball, he's not an active player anymore, but hey, that shows my age as well, right? And the big players of now, if you see Lionel Messi or Cristiano Ronaldo or Kylian Mbappe or whatever player you think is the best, it's almost an art form if you see how they can maybe not almost, maybe it is an art form in how they can control the ball. And it's not just with football, it's with basketball, it's with cricket, with whatever sport there is. It's an art form how these people train their bodies and what they are able to do with their bodies and with their sports. So that's the arts and entertainment. Let's see, and since I'm doing this without any notes present, because I teach on this a lot, I've got the knowledge present, but I forgot where we are. Let's see, politics, business, media, science and education, arts and entertainment. And then, of course, we have family. Family is everything surrounding the family. So that is how do you organize a family in your country? How do you treat your parents? How do you raise your children? The whole family structure, but also a little bit of psychology is in here. How do we work with through our problems, through our traumas that we experience, things like that. That's all part of the family mountain. And then lastly, and that is the one that a lot of church leaders just focus on, there's the religion mountain. And no matter what country you live in and what religion is the biggest one in your country, you can see that it always has an influence, and quite a big one as well. I've lived in a Hindu nation for some time that also is the birthplace of Buddha, the birth nation of Buddha. So there were a lot of Buddhists and Hindus there. And that does influence a nation quite heavily. And if you live in a society that is all with Shintoism or whatever religion there is, animism, it will always influence your nation. And through that, it will influence other stuff as well, because it will influence your ethical standpoints. You know, do you think it's okay to behave in a certain way, to treat your parents a certain way? Of course, you know, that comes from your religion, but it influences the family mountain. And from that, it influences your view of science. So you can see that all these spheres, they do overlap here and there. For instance, Facebook. Facebook is a social media, so you could say media, but it's a social media company. So is it in a business, or is it in media? Well, that's a good question. Or is it in entertainment? Because a lot of people just look at it and look at the shorts, look at the videos, look at the pictures people post. So is it part of that? or is it education, science and education? There's quite a lot of short videos or posts on there that teach you something. So is it in the education area, or is it political? Nowadays, in most countries, you cannot point to a single political campaign that does not use Facebook or all the other social media platforms to help in their campaign. And of course, sometimes these platforms also get used by certain countries or certain political parties to silence the other side, or to silence views that the ruling government doesn't really like. So in that way, it's really influenced through the political system as well. So all these spheres, though they are different, they also overlap in certain areas. Another one is an academic hospital. Academic, it says there's science and education going on there, so there's people being taught to be a doctor, but it also needs to run more or less profitable. You know, depending on the healthcare system in your nation, some hospitals in some nations will just make a huge loss on their operating costs, and that's not a problem because the government will pay for it. So I'm not saying that is right or wrong in any way. I'm just saying, it has to run like a company. If you're just wasting money as a hospital, you're not doing well. So you should run it a bit like a company. But then again, you're also into the science and education, and you're also into family. There's a lot of hospitals that have a chapel in it, or a prayer room, or something like that. And the ethical standpoint of the patient influences what the doctors are allowed to do. So all these spheres, you can see, they're all influencing each other. They're overlapping now and then, and that's what I think is how the original teaching by Loren Cunningham and Bill Bright came about, and that's what I think is the most important part about that. Now, over the years, over the decades, this has been changed into, or morphed into, the 7 mountain mandates, talking about the mountains where we believe that, or people believed that we should be aiming to be at the top of the mountain so we could decide what is happening in this mountain. Now, I think that is a very good picture of how the world works, but it's not how we as Christians should work. If you look at in the Bible, the only two or the biggest 2 examples you can see in the Bible that talk about this, the leaders in the Bible, I can point at 2, and that is Moses. No, not Moses, of course. Come on, Joseph and Daniel. Moses was a few hundred years later, but Joseph, he was second in command. But he had a huge influence in the nation of Egypt. He saved people through his wise counsel, and Pharaoh actually made him second in command. So he wasn't ruling. He was second in command. But he was very high up. If you're looking at that mountain, he was very high up. And Daniel was very high up as well. Daniel started out as a slave, and he still was a slave, basically, even later in life, at the end of his life. But he was serving the king. And because he was second in command, and he was, well, maybe not second in command, but he was very near the top. Because he was not the top, but near the top, he actually survived the transfer of power between the first 2 kings and the last 2 kings, because Daniel got to serve 4 different kings, and there were the Persians and the Medes, I think it was. I should have done research with this, but the second king only ruled for a short period, and he was replaced by another one who killed him. If Daniel was higher up, he would have been killed, and because he was a little lower on the pyramid, or on the stairs, or on the scale, whatever you want to use as an example, or as a picture, because he was a little bit lower, he could influence it longer, for a longer period of time, and through that be much a bigger influence in the history of the world. So, all that to say, I don't believe that we should be ruling from the tops of these mountains. I believe that we should be serving. Because there's only one mountain that we should be looking at building, and that is the mountain of the Lord. And there's only one person that's going to be at that top, and that is not us. That's Christ. So, all that to say, the 7 mountain mandate, I don't believe that we have a mandate to stand on top of those 7 mountains, but I do think it is very, very important that we, as church leaders, as religious leaders, train people to go into these mountains, to make sure that we serve and that we influence the mountain, so we can make the best. You know, the Bible teaches about pray for your leaders and pray for your country, so your country will live in peace, and you will live in peace because that is better for you. And I think that is the case, and that is the core of our teaching in this, and that we should focus on being a servant, and first of all a servant of Christ, and then serve the nation, because I think also that the system itself, it's a worldly system. If we change, if we infiltrate a system, the system itself is still a worldly system. And now, yes, that is a deviation from what I've written before. But I don't see it as a very, very heavy, as in I was wrong before. It's just my insight has grown and has changed over the time. So I'll leave you with that. I think that would be enough for this week. So thank you very much for watching this video, or for listening to this podcast, whatever platform you're using. And next week we'll be back. Thank you very much. Have a great week. Be blessed.
You've listened to a podcast by the 1820 Foundation and fivefold.eu. For more information and contact, please visit www.fivefold.eu. We are a ministry, and all the work we do is made possible from donations. If you would like to support us and contribute to the building of the kingdom, please also check out our website, the1820foundation.nl. Thank you for listening. Many blessings.